Good afternoon, everyone. Please help me in welcome Rory Boyce Werner. She's the Deputy CISO of Southern New Hampshire University, and her panel for today's session, Modus Operandi, Practical Security for Artificial Intelligence.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First, we would like to thank you for taking a little bit of your last day of RSA to spend it here with us, talking about practical security. Before we kind of jump in and introduce the other panelists and get into our discussion, we thought it would be helpful to provide a little overview of Southern New Hampshire University for those of you who are not familiar, because it will give you some context for our discussion. So the mission of Southern New Hampshire University, or SNU as we affectionately call it, is to transform lives at scale by making higher ed accessible and affordable to everyone. And what that means is making the principles that kind of mission is driven on are being learner-centric. Every decision that's made, every business operation is all about how do we support the success and experience of our learners, which is our students. We just call them learners. The second thing is being willing to challenge the status quo of higher ed and to be innovative and adaptive and really change how we deliver courses, where we deliver courses, and all of those aspects of higher ed. We do have a traditional on-campus experience for about 3,000 students, but we also cater to non-traditional students. So those are students, not first-time 4 years, as we would call, which is what you usually think about when you think of a college student. They are working adults. They are people in the military, veterans, military spouses. They're working parents. They're people like me. So in 2000, I was a single mom with 2 little kids. I had a job full-time as an IT admin and a handful of college credits. I couldn't get promoted because I didn't have a degree. Didn't matter how good I was at my job, just couldn't move up. And going back to college traditionally was just not available to me because I was a single mom with 2 little kids. And that's when I found SNU. And just for reference, in 2000, only about 40% of American households had internet access. So when we start talking about that's when I was taking classes online, keep that in mind. So when I graduated in 2003 with my bachelor's, we had a brand new president who was known for being challenging, and he really saw asynchronous online courses and degree programs as the future of higher ed, and more importantly, the way that SNU would fulfill its mission. And because of that, today we have over 200,000 online learners, and we are truly transforming lives at scale. So last year, or a little in late 2022, like all of you, ChatGPT rolls on the stage, starts the AI revolution, and where most universities are trying to figure out how do we keep students from using this to cheat, SNU is trying to figure out how can we use this emerging technology to improve our student experience, streamline our operations, really meet our mission. And for us, the members of SNU's Information Security Office, that meant we were scrambling to figure out what are the security implications of this new technology. And this is before any NIST standards, any OWASP standards, when I'm sure all of you were struggling with the same thing. And that is kind of what brings us to the stage today. So last fall, when we were trying to figure out what we wanted to propose as a panel, we had just started talking about what we needed to do, what kind of capabilities do we need to develop, what processes did we need to change or implement, and that journey from last September to today is what we're going to talk about. An honest look of what it means as a security team to try to grapple with an organization that is moving fast and breaking things. So we are going to start by talking about what our expectations were when we originally proposed the panel back in September. And our first panelist is Elizabeth Hubbard. She's our senior security architect, and she's going to provide the perspective from our security architecture and engineering teams.
Thank you, Rory. So my team, what our role is we provide all the security requirements to the developers, and we help them visualize the architecture for any of the solutions. We help them, we provide all the design inputs. We also do all the security and vendor reviews for any of the solutions that are being onboarding into SNU. And when we say AI tools, we're not just looking at the software, we're looking at the entire solution. So we're looking at the vendor processes, all of their controls that they have in place. We look at all the system and user processes. We look at the entire architecture, from the infrastructure, the configuration, from the data flows to the, all the way to how the data is used downstream. We look at the identity and access management, the data protections. And when all of these requests started coming online and coming to our department, I think we just thought we could use the same old processes we had, putting them through on a first come, first served basis.
Okay. And Shelby Dakota, who is our SOC manager, is going to talk about what that looked like from a security operations standpoint.
So at the time, I was a senior analyst on the SOC team. I was not the manager, so my expectations were a little bit different than what they are now. But from the start, we were just kind of thinking about conceptually how we would be monitoring for use, how we would detect use, and with our users being totally online, we don't really have a lot of visibility into what our students are doing. It's really just authentication into any SSO systems. So the focus was more on staff use on like an actual SNU-owned device. So we started thinking about that, and then we were seeing a lot of announcements from our existing tools where they were saying that they had AI features coming out, and we started looking at, well, what were the logging capabilities and monitoring capabilities on those tools. And then we were also thinking a lot about how it would be used against us. So with our online platform having over 200,000 students, we are a treasure trove for phishing. We get targeted with massive phishing attacks all the time. So we were concerned about how the campaigns would become much more sophisticated and more difficult to recognize. And then from our actual SOC team using AI tools, we were not considering that at the time. I'm still not really considering it. It kind of freaks me out a little bit, but I think I need to change my attitude there based on what I've heard this week. But for the most part, like any sort of automation or like AI sort of guidance that comes out of these tools from a SOC perspective, it's really difficult for us to adopt those because it kind of goes against our learner-centric approach. So the AI is going to say, oh, the student is compromised, which that happens quite frequently in our environment. Just disable their account, and someone will take a look at it later. That doesn't work with our environment. If they are trying to log on at 11:30 at night, their account's disabled, they have to submit their assignment in a half hour. That's not going to help them out. So we have a hard time with those sort of tools. But yeah, being an analyst, I was mostly waiting on leadership guidance to see, kind of tell us what direction we were heading in and where we needed to focus our efforts.
And from the security leadership perspective, we were just starting to talk about it, trying to figure out how to get a seat at the table, at all of the different tables where AI was being discussed. We thought there would definitely be some policy and standard work. We do have a GRC arm within our security management office. We thought they would play a role in that. And that actually brings us to our first challenge, which is probably our best challenge, which is a couple months later, SNU stood up an Office of AI. And that brought us Sean. So the reason that it was challenging for us is that all of the sudden, we didn't know what our jobs were in relation to AI. And this team, which is very small, was just trying to figure out what their jobs were too. So we were kind of all in a holding pattern, trying to figure out who was responsible for security, who was responsible for approving those solutions, who was keeping track of them. And so Sean Powers is our Director of AI Policy, and she's going to talk a little bit about her expectations when she joined, got her new role in December.
Yeah, well, much like Shelby, I was in a different role at the time that all this started to emerge with ChatGPT and all the rest. I had been serving for nearly a decade within academic affairs as an associate dean in the School of Arts, Sciences, and Education. And in that role, I work with policy all the time, whether it is implementing new policy, whether it's revising existing policy, guiding faculty, guiding students on how policy impacts them and what they do. And so it was that background that brought me into this brand new role in which I now sit today. And coming into this, certainly our expectation was that we needed something. We needed guidelines. We needed to help our students. We needed to help our faculty to understand how to use AI effectively and ethically within a learning environment and for students within their working lives. We also knew that any kind of policy that we put together had to be transparent. We had to make it clear to our entire community why the decisions were made, what led to these particular decisions. And also, too, we needed to be agile. We knew that this AI environment was changing daily. We didn't know from one day to the next what new tool was coming up on the horizon that was going to impact student learning. So agility was another big element that we had to somehow build in to our policy environment.
Awesome. Thank you guys all for setting that level set. So now we're going to talk about some of the other challenges that we ran into. The biggest one that affected all of us and everything at SNU was we were in the process of migrating to a new student information system. And if you've never worked at a university, that is like recreating the wheel. It was the 5-year program that our first launch was in October of last year. So what that meant from the AI perspective is that we had change blackouts, we had policy blackouts, we had resource constraints. So all of the things that we maybe needed to be able to do in order to embrace AI, a lot of that we couldn't do, and it was on hold. So this time we're going to start with Shelby.
Yeah, so we were very busy with the new student information system, obviously, and all of our other existing work also didn't stop. Attackers don't have to get permission to use AI tools, so we were continuing to see our usual flow of things into the queue. We were waiting on the AI team for guidance. Again, we weren't totally clear what our role was going to be in that still. And then we also were starting to look at to see if we could identify it actually being used in our environment by our faculty and staff. There wasn't an approved list or like approved used cases at the time, but when we would start just to explore, if like a vendor made an announcement about logging capabilities for their tools, I'd say, I wonder if we have any logs for this. Yep, it was being used all over the place and we had no idea if it was allowed or what we should be doing in response. So I think the biggest challenge that we had was that we just like severely underestimated how quickly things were going to move and probably did not prepare enough, but I don't really think anyone estimated that speed accurately. It's wild.
Yeah. There was a slide that one of the presenters showed that it was like the internet adoption, smartphones, and ChatGPT was 2 months. Like smartphones,
to reach a billion users.
15 years,
Yep.
just for scale. All right, Elizabeth, what are some of the challenges that you guys experienced in security engineering and architecture?
So a lot of our challenges, I think, varied by the type of category of product AI, of the AI tools that were being requested. For a lot of the public AI tools, we didn't have a contract, we didn't have a relationship with the vendor, so we couldn't go validate the security controls that were being put in place. And a lot of times that made us have to go back to the users and look at their use case, use what they were trying to do with it, and help them kind of readjust to match whatever the security controls we could put in place. For product AIs, that's like the third-party AIs that you do have a contract for. We could have a vendor relationship. We could go ask those questions. Even with those category of tools, we still were having trouble validating the controls that were being put in place from a vendor, because sometimes they were in preview, so they were specifically excluded from the contract. And then other times, they would provide, the vendor would provide a SOC 2 or some security policies, and we'd go back and look, and it predated the actual tool being brought on, so they didn't really apply to it, or they were specifically excluded from it. So again, we had to, with those situations, we really had to rely on our legal team to be able to mitigate some of those risks through contract, putting in responsibilities. That was difficult. And some of the other issues that we had with some of the product AIs was when you get a contract, normally we would have a business unit that actually kind of oversaw the product. So if we do a security review, we could do it one time, we could provide all the use cases. If somebody new wanted to come on board and use that product, they would have to get their justification validated and approved through that business unit. But with a lot of the AI tools, they were smaller and they might be licensed. So you don't actually have the team that's like gonna oversee it, which left it on us. So we're constantly validating their use cases, having to do the specialized training to help teach them how to implement those security controls, do all that threat modeling with them. And instead of having a team that can kind of help us and offset some of that, which really added to our backlog. With enterprise AI tools, those were like the custom ones that we started developing in-house. A lot of them are just in developed non-prod area. And we just didn't have the baselines to provide to our developers so that they could build in the security from the get-go. We didn't have the customized security requirements. We could get them general requirements, but it wasn't specific enough for them to be able to have a step-by-step or identify those threats and know what security controls they had to put in. So we had to work through a lot of that with them, which slowed down the process.
I also think one of the challenges that we kind of experienced on our side was there wasn't a clear approval process yet of like who at the university could approve you bringing on a tool that included AI, because the AI Office of AI was still being stood up, and so the security team kind of became the de facto approval. The other thing that I've heard you talk about before is tools that we already had in place that had already gone through our security vetting process, then had new functionality, and people just assumed, well, it's already approved, so we don't have to go back and see if this new AI capability introduces additional security risk, which is normally what we would ask them to do. All right, Sean, you must have unique challenges, so you want to talk us through some of the ones you had?
Absolutely, thanks. So we were in a really, really scant landscape when it came to policy. There weren't much of any templates out there for us to use as models for developing our own. You know, there was the executive order, of course, that came from the White House, but that was more guidelines for developing guidelines. And so we had to pay close attention to what was happening, and we continue to do this within different states, especially California, and within the EU as well, to try to get some guidance as to where we could see policy going when it came to AI. Another challenge is that governance is very slow. Governance is very deliberative, and AI is not. Governance should be slow, it should be deliberative, but when you're in that contrasting environment with AI, that's a difficult position to be able to navigate. Also too, within an institution of higher education, we are chock full of intellectual property. Every minute of every day, intellectual property is being developed by faculty, by students, by staff. And we don't know what the outcome is going to be of all of these high-profile cases that are making their way through the courts, and just how we should be going about protecting the intellectual property of our entire community. Scalability is always a challenge for us at SNU because we are so large. And our community is very diverse in terms of its needs, in terms of its knowledge. So not everybody is necessarily on the same page when it comes to something like AI. And as noted, we were deploying a new student information system. And as Rory mentioned, that put a pause on many things, including policy. So we were not able to either establish new policy or go in and revise existing policy until this pause period has been lifted.
I think one of the things that everyone can take away from this, if you are on this journey, is there's always going to be challenges. The work doesn't stop. You may not have the right governance and approvals in place. Policy takes a long time, and those are things that you need to try to plan for or find a way to expedite. Okay, so now we're going to look back and say, what did we actually get done compared to what we expected to get done? And this time we're going to start with you, Sean, because you're driving policy, which is
I'm driving that bus. So, because we couldn't establish new policy, what we did is we found a workaround by establishing something as simple as guidelines. So these are recommendations that are highly encouraged for people to use. But what we did is we grounded those guidelines in what was standing policy. So policies that come out of Rory's office, that come out of HR, that come out of federal laws, that come out of our accreditation standards, that come out of our academic integrity policy. So we already had policy at work that was addressing a lot of the ways that AI could be impacting the institution. So what we ended up doing is piloting these guidelines. We used the campus, which is relatively small. It's only about 3,000 students, maybe 140 full-time faculty, I guess about 400 adjuncts that we hire in a given semester. And so this was a relatively small community that we could work with, and we could pilot some guidelines that were based in academic needs regarding AI. And so we did this, and this gave us the opportunity then to be able to revise as needed given this AI environment. In addition to this, we also developed and deployed lots and lots and lots of training sessions, which we enjoy doing because all of us within the SNU AI team are teachers by training. But we're able to gear that training to the different audiences that we have within the university and what their particular needs might be. Though right now we are mostly focusing on AI literacy so that we're all operating from the same language in how we talk about AI, as well as the risks that come along with using AI. We created a SharePoint site for the entire SNU community, which acts as a repository for all things relating to AI. So this includes the guidelines that we developed. It includes a draft of a decision tree for users who are looking to adopt an AI tool in their particular work setting. And within this SharePoint site, there are links going out to other resources that we developed, including a ServiceNow ticketing system for users to present their use cases to adopt AI tools within their setting. There was also a task force that was convened by our Office of General Counsel in which data security, data policy is the focus, and we are together developing a playbook so that for users who are looking to adopt an AI tool will have some reference and background in terms of how they go about thinking how to move forward with their use case.
I think you call out two things that it doesn't matter what industry you're in, that you could take away from this. The first is if you're trying to develop policy, maybe there's a microcosm within your organization, like our campus, that you can pilot and move iteratively so that you can move faster than you maybe normally could with policy. The second one is the importance of literacy training. That I've been involved in several discussions about AI over the course of this week, and that is something that comes up every time, is making sure that everyone in your organization understands what AI means, that it doesn't always, like there are different kinds of AI, and that they are all kind of speaking the same language. All right, Elizabeth, how about from security engineering and architecture?
So with the AI team providing a lot of the governance, with the security education team working with the AI teams to provide a lot of that training and that general knowledge, our legal teams were stepping up and providing a lot of the risk mitigation. We were able to focus on just improving our processes. And the way we did that is we just kind of listed out all of the use cases. We took all of the proposed use cases, everything that was approved, we categorized them so that we understood what we were reviewing. Then we went ahead and prioritized them based on whether or not they were approved, what their implementation timeline was, and then we started performing the different reviews and threat modeling on those, visualizing them, then taking those back, improving our security requirements, using them as templates, so to speak, to help our developers kind of move faster and help us out as we were moving along. Some of the other things that we did, I think we rolled out some tools to help automate some of the assessment process.
Great. How about on the SecOps side, Shelby?
I don't really know if we got a lot done. I feel like we just kind of like put out fires, a typical incident response situation. We kind of just like pleaded for everyone to please slow down. Like guidelines were coming out, recommendations were being made, but then we actually see people not following those things. And it's not totally clear like what we are supposed to do when we identify that. So we kind of like really pleaded for people to slow down. And since we are the incident response team, we use our knowledge of the incidents that we typically see in our environment and our knowledge of some of the control gaps that we have, and really use that to explain all the way up the chain how AI impacts that. So how is it going to make our incidents worse? How is it going to make them happen more often? The control gaps that we have that previously our executives were comfortable with the risk level. When you bring AI into it, how does it adjust that? How does it make the risk worse? And really quantifying that for them and explaining it to them. We spent a lot of time doing that. But once the guidelines and the approved list of tools had come out, we did a lot more deliberate planning for logging and monitoring of those solutions, looking at if there was any chance that we were going to have visibility into what people were putting into prompts. It seems like no, that is not going to be the case, but at least having the visibility of what data those tools are accessing from your environment. But yeah, for the most part, it was spent on quantifying the risk, and it's definitely difficult in our environment because of how, like, in higher ed, it's the very basic security controls that an organization of our size that is not in higher ed, we can't implement those because it goes against our learner-centric approach, makes it more difficult to access education resources. So it really, introducing AI into it just makes those risks so much worse. And we spent a lot of time trying to explain that to people.
I think Shelby calls out two important things if you're working with your organization. First, make sure that your SecOps team is involved and they understand what things are coming down the pike, so they can have the right logs, set up the right alerts. They understand what they need to be looking for that's different than it is for everything else. The second thing is risk tolerance. So if you have accepted risks, really going back and looking at those to see, does introducing AI change that risk, and does that push it above your risk tolerance? Do you need to go back and re-explain that risk? Like Shelby said, we spend a lot of time trying to help people across the university understand what it means if we implement this specific tool because of risk that we already have.
And I think what makes that a lot easier is when you have the training and the literacy so that people actually understand what you're saying when you're trying to explain the risk to them.
It's a great call out. All right, so if we were back in September again, let's talk about what you guys would do differently. We're going to start with you, Shelby.
I think that I would push to be involved I'd be more proactive with that. So I would like reaching out to Sean's team earlier on, not just assuming that they were going to involve us. They even knew about us, what our purpose was at the university. I'd start looking at data governance and DLP because it's going to obviously become even more important now. When vendors are making announcements about logging capabilities, exploring those like as soon as possible, and if there are gaps in the logging, which we are seeing already, pushing back on that as soon as possible. The more comfortable security teams are with the logging, the more likely that they're going to approve your business to use them. So I feel like if we get out in front of it, they're likely to improve those logging gaps. And then I also would have started sooner with quantifying the risk.
How about on security, engineering, and architecture?
I think I too would have just started earlier with some of the stuff that we did. I would have been categorizing earlier, prioritizing earlier, just making more of the templates. And when a lot of our users were bringing forward some of their proposals, I think I'd have helped them just look at what the problem is that they were trying to solve, and then choose the tool that would have fit that problem with, of course, the least amount of risk to the organization based on whatever the maturity level is of the controls that we have in place at the time.
I think that is something that I've heard over and over again this week, is that it's very easy for people in the business outside of security to see AI and think about all the great things that it can do and not really understand the implications of that, and then it becomes a solution in search of a problem. What we found is that it's really important to understand what is the specific business problem that you're trying to solve, and does the AI tool or capability that your business team wants to implement actually solve that problem? All right, Sean, what would you have done differently if we were back in December?
Yeah, I came on board in December. What we would have done differently, or what we wish we could have done differently, was to recruit student voice in those initial guidelines. Students are our most important population within the university. Their interaction with AI is everything to us. We want to ensure that all of our students graduate knowing how to effectively and ethically use AI in their work and in their lives, and we needed that voice. However, every fall we do a student experience survey of all students across all modalities, just checking in to see how they're doing. And this past fall, the Academic Integrity Workforce inserted a question regarding AI, and that was whether or not students were actually reaching out to AI as an outside source to help them in their work. Now, this is self-reporting, so you have to take it all with a grain of salt, but 70% of our campus students reported not using AI in any way, and nearly 90% of our online students reported not using AI in any way. And if we go back to Rory's story regarding her introduction to SNU as an adult learner, certainly somebody in Rory's circumstances probably doesn't have the privilege of time to investigate something like AI. There's just too many urgent things happening in life to slow down and take a look at AI. So perhaps our student voice wasn't yet ready to help us in this early, quick endeavor. However, we are now putting together a student task force to help us as we move forward, as this iteration of guidelines continues, and we look forward to working with them starting in the fall.
I think that's another key piece of information that can help you, is to be wary of assumptions that everyone else has the same level of AI understanding that you do. It just reiterates trying to create some kind of baseline so that everyone has the same language, and when everyone is using terms in your organization, they understand what they mean and everyone means the same thing. All right, well, thank you guys. I was the one that initiated this panel, so I owe them a huge amount of thanks for doing this with me. And some of our key takeaways for all of you is in the next week, look at your process for third-party risk assessment. Do you need to make any changes? Do you need to incorporate new guidelines from OWASP or NIST? Are you accounting for AI? Start capturing an inventory of AI, not just tools that you're building or tools that are specifically for AI, but all of the AI capabilities that tools that you already use are introducing. In the next 3 months, categorize and Elizabeth will correct me, but like when I say categorize, I mean based on what works for your organization, not necessarily the way that the industry is categorizing AI. Well, how do you need to categorize AI to make it so that you can have standardized security controls, so that you can assess them the same way, so that you're speaking the same language? Look for where else you might need process improvements in your security team. What do you need to do for SecOps? What do you need to do for engineering, for architecture, for GRC? Engage your stakeholders and develop or revise AI guidelines and policy. All of the things that Sean is working on and talked about. And then conduct threat modeling for the different types of AI that already exist in your environment or that are planned for your environment. Anything else you guys want to add?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, we are happy to take questions if anybody has any questions. And thank you again for coming and listening when I'm sure there are lots of other things you could have been doing. Good job, guys. All right, if you do have questions and you want to ask us, you can always find us or connect to us on LinkedIn. Thank you. Enjoy Alicia Keys.